Hello, I'm Svitek, 360 Creative Coach, and in this episode, I want to give you tips and the various ways you can film in low light situations. Now, before I get into it, I would like to take the opportunity to invite you to subscribe if you haven't already. That way you get all the various lessons and episodes that I put out right when I put them out. Thank you if you just did, and thank you if you already were. It truly does mean a lot to me, as I hope it does to you. So let's talk about this. There's overall at least six ways that I look at it in terms of how you can film something in low light situations. Now, the first and most obvious, perhaps, is to add extra light. If however you can, just brighten it up. So a lot of times people will put a light directly onto the camera, like an LED that's battery powered and so forth. It's great, The downside with that is obviously it's a very direct light, so if you're turning, it might not look naturalistic if you're trying to film more of a narrative aspect, but that is a way, right? However you can, add extra light. One of the things that I use as a cheat is, when I film, regardless of whether I'm filming nonfiction or fiction, I try to place people specifically under lampposts in places that have ambient light kind of hitting from all places. That's why like filming in cities at night isn't so bad, because you have all that ambient light. Filming in the middle of the woods, a little bit harder, right? But in whatever way that you can, add some light, and that's how you can film in low light situations. The other aspect is, rather than try to fight it, utilize the darkness, right? Make it part of the image, and sometimes it depends what you're filming, but of course, like horror movies are known for using light and shadow in very specific ways. And so, get creative with it. I'm trying to use that darkness as a means to help propel what you're telling, rather than fighting against it, right? And there's definitely been situations that I've used that in that way, and that's fine. The third one is to use a bigger aperture. So aperture refers to the lens, right? So a lens can let in a small amount of light or a large amount of light. And when we talk about a bigger aperture, it means we're letting in a lot more light. Now, to let a lot more light in, generally, so we in filmmaking, it's based off of f-stops, and you want the bigger the aperture as far as it's being open, it's actually a smaller number. So an f-stop of 4 lets in less light than an f-stop of 1.8. Now, the reason I give those numbers is generally the cheaper lenses start at, generally around like f-stop 3, generally 4. And so in order to have a bigger aperture, you might have to spend some money, and generally like 1.8 is about where most lenses with a wide aperture kind of go to. There's some that are like 1.4, things of that nature, but generally 1.8 is as wide as you're gonna get. But again, some of that might be a little bit costly, so it depends on what you're using. But regardless, the idea is to open up that aperture as much as you can. The other trick, the fourth trick, is to reduce the frame rate. So, with video, we film either in 30 frames per second or now 60 frames per second. And that's a lot of frames. So, that means the camera has to capture 60 frames within a second. And therefore, the amount of time, the exposure time of each of those frames is very small. So if you reduce the frame rate down to, let's say, 24 frames, which is what film is normally shot on, you're now exposing each frame longer, right? Not a lot longer, but longer. Certainly 24 compared to 60, that's a big difference, right? So that helps. The other aspect is your shutter speed, or shutter angle. DSLR cameras, they work with shutter speed, but the idea is you want to reduce the shutter speed and open it up. So, for example, in film, most film gets shot on a 180-degree angle. Because it gives it a nice blur and so forth, right? I mean, it's too much to get into right now, but that means think of it like a circle, right? And so half the circle gets covered up, right, at any given moment, and that's how the exposure happens. That's the 180. But with like a Blackmagic camera, for example, with myself, I literally open up the shutter angle to 360. So meaning the entire space is opened up, and it's allowing for more light it's allowing for light to get in the entire time that it's open. And the drawback with this is that any sort of movement will be a lot blurrier. But generally for me, I don't film a lot of action in low light situations at night, right? So it's never really been that much of a drawback for me. No one's really noticed when I do that technique. But that is a way to do it, And if you're using like a DSLR camera, the idea is, just reduce the shutter speed so that way you're exposing the image more, right? That's really what it's all these techniques are really about, or most of them are about exposing the image more and for longer, right? And the last one is to use a higher ISO. So whether you use film or digital, it works in ISO. And the lower the ISO, the more light you would need to expose something, and you use lower ISO in daylight and so forth. And lower ISO is great because it's crisp, right? It gives you a very clean image. You increase the ISO, it starts to get a little bit grainy and noisy. So this is the drawback of this, but if you need it in order to film something, it's not going to make, like with everything, all of this, there's a concession to be made, there's choices to be made, and you can lean into the look or, fight against it. But, there's a give and take to everything. And so, if in order to expose the film or the image right, you have to go a little bit higher with the ISO, so be it, Anyway, these are the various ways to film in low light situations. Let me know if you have questions. Let me know if you have suggestions of your own to help. I would love to hear from you either way, whether down in the comments section or hit me up on social media at Svitek. Likewise, if you think this episode might be a benefit to somebody, please share it with them. I certainly would appreciate it. I appreciate you. I'll see you next time.